Welcome to the GreenPilled Network podcast. You are listening to season 5, this summer of Retro Rounds, which is hosted by Sejal and Lao Now Mao. This season will explore retroactive funding in Web3, and each episode features a different ecosystem unpacking their experience in implementing the retro funding mechanism. We'll explore how they're tailoring retroactive funding to their unique ecosystem, along with the challenges they've faced and ways of overcoming that. This season is co-hosted by Sejal and Lao Now Mao, and the next voices you'll hear on this episode are from them. Enjoy.
Hi everyone, welcome to the third episode of Summer of Retro Rounds. This episode is with Pokt. So we have Ben, who led the retro round for Pokt. Interestingly, this is not the first retro round of Pokt. They have done it previously, but it's the first time they have used EasyRPGF to run a retro round, right? So I'm excited to explore how that went. Pokt's round design has been quite unique. It has been quite creative, and excited to explore and learn more about what went in that process. What are you excited about, Lau?
Yes, there's at least two things that I'm really excited to ask Ben more of. The first one is I'd love to see how Pokt use the funding that they received from Optimism and Arbitrum through different grant programs, like one of them being Optimism's Research BGF3, to fund their own dependencies. I know that this is something that we want the whole Web3 ecosystem to move towards, because we know that decision and evaluation of what's been impactful to one part of the ecosystem is better done by those within those projects or ecosystems. So really excited to hear how they approach that. And then secondly is Pokt was so fascinating and how they ran the round. They forked their own version of the platform to add new features that made voting a lot easier for badge holders. So I'm really looking forward to hear how that process was and what were some of these new features that they implemented.
Hi, Ben. Welcome. And hi, Lana, my co host for this season. Welcome. Ben, would love for you to share a bit more about your background. Like, if you could give a TLDR of your experience and, where all you've been working at. And yeah.
Sure, I would love to. Yeah, my background is sort of in organizational design. So I worked for quite a big company, sort of managing their human capital and resource allocation of their people, which got me really excited about the role that people play in organizations, and eventually reached a point where I was like, what cool uses of organizations? And I found DAOs, which basically brought me into the Web3 space. So I've been doing this for probably 3.5, 4 years now. Yeah, helping organizations in terms of the way that they organize people capital, their financial capital, and the coming together of those two things now around grants programs. So yeah, it's been a great experience, and looking forward to the chat today.
Yes, I think this is one of the pieces that's really interesting and oftentimes overlooked when people are thinking about grants programs. It's like at the end of the day, several of these grants programs are focused on how do we bring more people into the ecosystems? How do we, and not only bring them, because like this is also one of the backlashes that some of the grants programs have had in terms of having extractive members that come along. So how do we keep people here? How do we give them a good experience? And I think this is also one of the fundamental pieces when we think about retroactive rounds. These are rounds in which we have a very large inclusion of the community or certain community members that are voicing preferences about what they think might be useful for the ecosystem. So, can you tell us a little bit more about, based on your background and what some of the other programs that the Pokt ecosystem had run, what inspired you to embark on this new community driven experiment on grants by using retroactive funding?
Sure. Yeah. So we had a situation, it sort of always existed at Pokt, where there was retroactive funding all of the time that Pokt existed. But it was pretty horrible. It was usually people sort of turning up and saying, I did this work. Yep. I would like to be compensated for that. Yeah. And then just like a pile on of all these different perspectives of like, this is useless and you're asking for too much and all of that sort of stuff. So it was a very like high burden on the individual to sort of prove that individual instance. And it was all like singular proposals. So we quickly identified two things. One, that's not an experience that people want. They're not going to keep coming back. They're not going to keep building for you if you sort of do that to them every time. The other thing was that actually we needed different grants mechanisms. Like we needed a quick grants mechanism that allowed people to just start innovating quickly. Yep. Got out of the debate and started to focus on evidence, which was, here's a small seed fund. Yep. You go and do something. If it works, you'll keep going. If it doesn't work, that's the end of it. Yep. And we thought that was a better way to sort of get people started. And then we also focused on RFPs, like how we actually find the talent to do the things that we really want and create that focus. Yep. And then the third one was retroactive funds, which we're like, all right, we've got to come up with a better mechanism for that. So we started with the other two. Yep. The option was always there for people to still seek retroactive funding. But a beautiful thing happened. Those other grants mechanisms started working. Yep. And optimism sort of really came into its own. Yep. And captured like a really good mechanism for doing that. So for us, it was a matter of coming back to retroactive funding at the time that, we thought it could really be implemented in a way that was great for Pokt.
Yes, I think that's really interesting. It's definitely one of the things that we've seen with some of the other ecosystems in terms of improving the community member grantee, like retroactive grantee experience, precisely because this mechanism is really based on generating incentives for people to continue building, right? For people to continue contributing and focus more on what is the impact and the value that I'm generating for the ecosystem, because and focus on that because I know that I will be getting rewarded. So it's also very interesting to see like how this, okay, let's retry retro after having had some of it in the ecosystem in a way that, as you mentioned, might like only pushes for people, I'm guessing, that might be very thick skinned to continue trying it. So super interesting to hear more as well in terms of, did you see any difference in behavior like after, or did you receive feedback from the people that have participated in this last round in terms of like how their experience was in comparison to what retroactive funding had there been before in the Pokt ecosystem?
Yeah, so I think like I had examples from the past that of people that had sort of got burned by the previous sort of retroactive process who said, I'm not going to put myself through that again. Yeah. And those people often just continued to build for Pokt in the hope that they could monetize what they were doing, or that eventually we would sort of solve this challenge. So actually they participated in the round, which I think was like, an amazing sort of thing for people to say, never using the DAO again. I hate the DAO. DAO's stupid. To come back and actually go, hey, I believe in this program. I'm going to put my name in there, and people can assess me against sort of my peers and other projects that are creating impact. So that was great. I think the thing that brought us back to retroactive funding, and it's something you touched on at the start, is that it really is like a talent attraction and retention engine. The way that I think about it is like humans love certainty. Yeah. If I have more certainty, I'm going to move in that direction. Yep. Retroactive funding sort of gives you certainty that like if you create impact, there's going to be some funding there. There's going to be some mechanism for you. So for us, it was always something we were going to come back to for that reason. May not be the best way to get people started yet, may not be the best way to get people focused on exactly what you want to deliver as an ecosystem, but I think it is definitely the right type of mechanism to give people certainty that ultimately they will be rewarded in a way that reflects the impact that they're creating over the longer term, which I just see as a huge differentiator that doesn't exist in a lot of ecosystems. A lot of people come in, I want to do this thing, get the bad news, they're off to the next one, which is pretty unsustainable to have everyone sort of on that merry-go-round. So I think this is something that, starts to create a gravity, which, we were hoping to see at Pokt, and I think any organization that's using retroactive funding will continue to see that.
Yeah, this is something really exciting and really interesting. I think for most of the ecosystems that have ran this first round, it's really important that they, as you said, this is part of a larger incentive mechanism that reinforces itself the more rounds there are. So we also hope to see more rounds within the Pocket ecosystem, and going precisely into how you make this mechanism more robust. I think the design process is one of the most creative and complex phases of the round. And we know that the Pocket team that you were leading brought several changes into the initial way in which Optimism had designed it and ran their own round. Can you tell us more on how the team, how you approached developing and designing this new round, working? What was also really interesting is Pocket made this complete new fork of the platform to enable more changes for how people were choosing the projects, were reviewing, what kind of information they were reviewing. Can you tell us a little bit more about how this design process went out?
Yeah, I think our design process was two parts. One was to like come up with the objectives, yep, of the program and to really try and think about those. And then the second one was how do we want to try and make it better, which is really just like what experiments are we going to try in our round. So when we think about the objectives, our design process was around how do we stimulate activity that increases the connection of Pocket to other ecosystems that it's working with. And because Pocket is sort of like a public good in a way, providing like node infrastructure for different ecosystems, we receive funds within Pocket. We receive grants from other ecosystems. So we had received grants from Arbitrum. We received grant from Optimism for Retroactive round 3. So for us, it was about how do we sort of maybe redistribute those funds through our program, in the hope that Optimism, Arbitrum, other ecosystems sort of become like the first domino. Yeah. And we continue that to get back to the impact creators within our ecosystem. It makes no sense for Pocket to keep all these funds in its own treasury. Yeah. It should be making sure that same as we get those funds as impact creators, it gets down to the individuals or teams involved in creating that. So that was like a big objective of the design process, was to figure out how it could create stronger connections with other ecosystems we were building with. But yeah, when we get into like the experiments of how we can make the program better, I think our observations were that the voting assessment and sort of ranking process is quite difficult. One reason for that, I think, is everyone has different context. It would be beautiful if I could understand who the 600 projects in the Optimism ecosystem were and use my knowledge to vote on them effectively. Can't. So how to actually get that knowledge from other people was one part. And the experiment we decided to create around that was just to give people the ability to share their context. We created a feedback and comments section that the community could contribute into. I love this project. Yep, this is great. This has done nothing, whatever it happens to be. Yeah, we wanted to create that. And then for voters to have that information as well of like, I think this is one of the best projects. Here are the reasons that I think this is the metric that really jumps out to me, so that when Sejal or Law comes in behind me, they actually have that context, which shouldn't necessarily influence their decision, but should give them more things to think about when they're trying to use that information. So that was one part. I think the rubric was a second part to that, which is to then just think about how you consider impact. What are the dimensions of it? What are the characteristics? How do you start to think about what might be higher impact versus lower impact, and how could you find a common way to sort of talk about that? And then the last one was something that we were really excited about, which is, I think it's sort of pretty easy for somebody who is considerate and knowledgeable to say, this is high impact, and this is low impact. What's much harder is to go, what is that worth? And what is this worth? You got to be a finance expert. You got to be like a VC or something. It's probably a little bit too much to ask of voters, I think. So we created these impact tiers, so that you simply had highest, high, medium, low, or no impact put something into a tier, yep, and we have like a point system or an algorithm that sat behind that would work out the distribution. That created lots of edge cases and lots of things. I could probably talk about the algorithm until we all go crazy. But ultimately, it did make it a lot easier for people to just think, okay, here are the highest impact things, here are the low impact things. I've done my job, I'll move on. I'm sure it's all going to balance out in the way that we like. Yeah, which was really successful. So yeah, I think our design was really around what do we want the program to do, and then how can we contribute something back into the broader knowledge around public goods.
There are so many things that I've been now thinking. Like, first, huge kudos to the team that they decided to use the funding that they received from Optimism, right, and Arbitrum, right. I think that sets such a great example of how do you make connections with the ecosystems and like give forward, right. I think there is something there, and I really hope that more and more ecosystems consider doing it, right. Like in this cohort, I know like libp2p is the other ecosystem which actually did this, right. So I think that is that's just so great to see. I also think before coming to like getting deeper into the impact tiers and Rubric, like you mentioned, I really like the fact that the comment section, I know it's may not be the the biggest thing, but it was so helpful, like for full disclosure. Like I and Lao Namu were also badge holders in this round, and it was like wow, every like it gave so much context, and it just helped in so many ways. Like it helped us to evaluate better and have that background, right, which also I think is a great way to have other folks as batch holders, like because there's no expectation. It's not like you need to have all the context and you need to know all the details, right. Yes, team is there who will help you provide context, and then you use your sense to just evaluate and everything. So it was great. Like I went in there and yeah.
Yes, I think this is particularly one of the things that, for example, the optimism ecosystem has been talking about more as well, in terms of how do we bring the knowledge of more of the people that are really interacting with the contributions and ensure that badge holders get a chance to hear from those that are firsthand using the tools, benefiting from the contributions, so that those voices are also heard. It's one of the things that has come up repeatedly now with badge holders in the optimism ecosystem, sort of like we should like yes, we are badge holders because we care about where the ecosystem is going, but as we're looking to reward specific tools, specific research projects that we might not be directly benefiting from. So we don't have a larger overview of who all is using these tools. How do we source more of that information? So as Sejal mentioned, it was one of the greatest additions, to be quite honest, as I was going through the voting and sort of like comparing it with my experience as well as an optimism badge holder. Is like, oh, I have so much more data that is not only what is the project presenting and what is the narrative that they want me to look at and hear, but I'm also getting to hear and read from the experiences of others on, oh, okay, this project is selling itself in this way, but I'm also able to understand how is the actual user experience or developer experience for a particular contribution. So that was a great addition.
That's great. I think there's this natural tendency as well of like there's the wisdom of the crowd. Yeah. And then eventually someone says, oh, we need experts to do it. Crowd's stupid. Let's just have 5 people decide, because they're the smartest and they're the most knowledgeable, which, I mean, they're somewhere in between, of course, is the right answer. But that tends to become politicized then, it's like you got to curry favor with the 5 people, you got to make sure the 5 people can see what you're doing. So I actually like mechanisms that, try and give more people context so you can have more participation. I think if we're continuing to move in that direction, then that's great.
Yeah, I think it definitely served the purpose. And see, you mentioned about the rubric. I just want to like go back a little bit, and would love to know more a bit about the batch holder selection process that happened, right? Like how did you go about selecting batch holders, or what was the thought process behind who should be these people, right? And then I just want to get a little bit deeper on like how was the rubric developed or who developed it, like what was that process like, right?
Pocket has a really interesting governance system. It's like a reputational one person, one vote. So people complete a bunch of quests or demonstrate their knowledge and participation in the ecosystem, and then essentially they become a DAO voter who were our badge holders for this. So I guess it's a little bit like the Citizens House in Optimism, in that are citizens of Pocket, but our people had earned that. There was sort of like a common understanding of how you earn your vote that way. We added to that. We had a few members of the foundation, like myself, and then you guys, of course, to just add like a deeper dimension around knowledge of retroactive funding, the broader Web3 ecosystem, this sort of stuff. So I think it was a really good balance to sort of have 75% badge holders that are just our community, our DAO voters, and then this other 25% that are more knowledgeable or context on perhaps things that can add to the voting pool and what that looks like. The rubric was great. I wish Themes was here and could talk about it. She would do a much better job than me. But we had 3 sort of categories. Yeah, protocol, we had an ecosystem, we sort of had a community dimension. And because sort of everything was in one pool, it was always going to be like incredibly difficult to like balance those up. Yeah, I'm a developer. I think protocol's most important. All the protocol projects are like the highest impact. Create a lot of problems for yourself if you go down that path. So the rubric was like, I think, an essential part of helping the categories sort of normalize in some way, find a better balance between that, but also just allow people to think about the different dimensions. You can have something that changes, I think, the nature of the ecosystem. Yeah, like we had one contribution which essentially change some of the protocol parameters that would allow you to change like how much each relay or how much each like unit is rewarded, which basically made Pocket available to like AI inference or other use cases that are a lot more expensive than like blockchain RPCs. So that like fundamentally changed like what Pocket is in a way. Yeah. Do most people know about that? Like, is it driving more users today? Yeah. Did it get a lot of buzz on social media? No. So you do actually need to have ways that you think about, those different dimensions. And the work that Themes did was great because it was sort of so comprehensive in a way that it allowed people to be, I think, a bit more objective with the process. You could fill out the rubric, you could get a score, you could think about that score and stack rank everything if you want. I think that was like a really useful mechanism for people to use as they went through the voting process. Probably going back to the design question, there was the rubric and then there was where you voted. And what happened in between those 2 bits? I don't know. And we probably should try and shrink that gap. So there's a much better connection between the two. But I think it was really good to have that. And I'm a little bit worried about what might have happened if we didn't.
Yeah, I think this is a really good point, and it was definitely a really nice addition. I think there's like from what I've seen both in Optimism and in other rounds, there are certain steps in terms of how involved some of the foundations or designing teams get into how the decisions are made by the participants. Sometimes I think it starts in a very loose way. I think that's how Optimism started, and it's been evolving in a sense of let's put more rails on what people are deciding on. And in the first experiments, and similar with, as you mentioned, in round 3, where it's like, okay, these are the projects, look at them, tell us how much money we should be giving them. It becomes quite an overload in terms of like a cognitive overload of thinking of like, okay, I will read through the projects and then there are categories. How do I compare projects within the same category? And then how much, you brought it up before as well, as like how do I turn that into money? And like I ran some of the workshops for badge holders in that round. And it was one of the processes that we were looking at and experimented through, like, okay, let's just look at two projects within the same one. Are there questions that we can generate so that we compare them? And then what can we think of? How do we turn now this point system into money? Or like, what are some of the aspects that we can think about on how do we price this? And that was one of the biggest barriers. So I think this abstraction that you enabled through the rubric on, okay, if you give them this many points, how do you compare them against each other within that category? And then it's easier to go from there into, okay, if I gave them, like, if I have this many with this many points, or like if this is the one that got scored the most, then I can equate that into high impact, or this one I can equate it into low impact. I do think that it made that process of jumping from the points into the tiers uh, a lot easier. And then I also really like how there were these questions pre-selected, or yeah, like pre-selected within the rubric, within this different questions for each of the categories, which I think also enabled us to think more, not only on our, oh, this is what we think is good for the ecosystem, but also what are some of the things that are relevant from, I would say, like the foundation perspective, or like the DAO plus foundation perspective, and not only from the voter perspective, which again, it adds, I think having those two pictures really adds value into what ends up being decided. And I know that for some people it might be like, oh, but this is like centralization, and like they are the ones that dictate this. But at the end of the day, it's more tools that enable you to make a better job when you're making these decisions. It reduces sort of like how much information has to be on your head. I know that, for example, for optimism, it was like, well, we have the badge holder manual. And then one of the things was like, we're actually not sure how many people are reading through the whole badge holder manual. There's a lot of good information there, but do we know if people are reading through the whole thing? Do we know if people are using the whole thing? And I think by having this rubric, it really brought it up to like, oh, it's not only making my life easier, but it's also enabling me to understand from a different perspective, or like information that I might have not been aware of otherwise. How do I bring it into my decision making process? So I definitely think that these additional tools that are created, sometimes either by community members, and like in this instance, for example, by one of the other DAO members, to make this process easier. Also, just as a badge holder, you want to participate in the experiment. It reduces like how much time you think or feel it's gonna take, so that you really want to get engaged with like, oh, okay, go through these questions, look at the projects.
I totally agree. And one thing that I think all of this does is it reduces the number of outliers too, right? Probably makes it a little bit quicker. Yeah, helps people sort through it, helps them make better decisions, but it just like stops the extreme ones. And that was probably one of the things that I think was really good about the impact tiers. Yep, is it was very rare that you saw something that was marked low by a lot of people. Yeah. Also ranked highest or high by people. It did sort of start to normalize around the impact here. So I think that's great. Like if that's happening, you're sort of people are moving in the common direction, and you're reducing those outliers, which I think just makes a huge difference. Yeah.
One of the things that I feel is that optimism has laid this foundation where others can learn and build on it, right? Like understand and see what their learnings have been. And this seems to be something like that should be added to the, that common knowledge base, right? Like this is absolutely something that is going to be handy. It's going to be really useful for other ecosystems running that round, right? So do you see that, this can be added, and how do you see that other ecosystems, can also use this and just, make it, maybe just, integrate it in their process and design?
Anyone who's using the Easy Retro PGF platform can access our repos and get the impact tiers for voting. They can get the comment section. All of that's open and can be shared. I'm not sure if there's show notes, but we can make sure we find those links for anyone that wants that. I do think that's like a really important part of this, and sort of one of the challenges at the moment right now. I think pioneering stuff is often it's taking 80 or 90% of what someone else has got and just like making a small change. Yeah, it's a brand new thing, because it has all of these new interactions within it. So I think it's really important that people make that commitment to like open source, that we get really well structured around how we build that common knowledge, that common infrastructure for people to access. And then I think we need to make it a little bit easier as well. One of my concerns at the moment is it feels like everything is bespoke. What I mean by that is like, yes, an ecosystem sort of iterates on what they've created in the past and they get better, but anyone else that wants to pick that up and sort of follow along is often left to start at the start. How do I integrate those three tools to do what Optimism's doing or what Pocket's doing? I've sort of got to start from the start with that, whereas I think it would be much better if I can mostly pick that up. Yep. And there's more modularity around it, so I can change where I want to without sort of creating a lot of headaches for myself. I just think this is like a super important part of what we need to be doing here, which is thinking about how we are building common open source infrastructure around these grant programs in the same way we hope people are building them around the protocols that we're supporting.
Yes, I think this is such an important piece that we've been talking with in some of the other episodes as well with the Filecoin team and with the Macy team is like, how do we make sure that we are sharing all of the mistakes, the things that went well? Like, I think most often we see grant programs and their different iterations sharing like, this is what was really successful, but we miss out on the opportunity as well to share, well, this part didn't work so well. And so we would suggest others to do it in this different way, or this is where we got stuck. And we got stuck here. So we made these other decisions so that we're not only seeing the what went well, what didn't go well, but the logic as well behind the decisions that happen afterwards, so that others can understand, okay, is this something that could also happen in my ecosystem if I'm using this mechanism, or is this something that wouldn't happen? In this sense, what are some of the things that you would like to share that it didn't go as it was planned, so we would suggest going through this other route, or we were able to fix it in this way that others could learn from?
It's going to be a long episode now as I explain all the things we did wrong. I think two things sort of come to mind for me. One was with the impact tiers. Yeah, it did a really good job of making it easy for voters, but it sort of forced a distribution, right? Which is not actually a problem itself. It happens in lots of things. Lots of corporates sort of operate with a sort of standard distribution or normal distribution for pay and salaries and rewards and bonuses, all of that sort of stuff. It's not necessarily a problem, but what we found was, to solve the edge cases, not allow people to like make everything highest impact. Yep. Or I just vote for three things and I forget everyone else and I don't care and warp the results that way. We created a distribution, which meant we sort of had a longer tail of like low impact projects that got rewards, which I actually personally would have liked to see more of that low impact maybe eliminated. Yep. And more of that go to the highest impact things to like keep encouraging them and maybe inspire the low impact to strive to get up to that highest impact sort of level. So I think that was one thing that maybe didn't work perfectly, was just how the results got distributed. We need to tweak the algorithm a little bit. The other one is just like full rookie error. We got excited about the objectives of the program. We got excited about the experiments. We probably didn't step by step from the user perspective enough. So the worst part, I think, of our program was the application form and process. Which we sort of just picked up. And we're like, okay, you just apply. We don't have to do too much there. It captures all the details. We're all good. Well, it does capture most of the details, but it misses quite a few too. And it doesn't sort of force people to capture the right metrics, yep, and hold them to account if they don't. And you definitely need markup so you don't get like a wall of text that people are like looking into the screen trying to read. So I think another mistake that we made was probably not that user perspective, like following it through end to end, and maybe focusing too much on the shiny things and not the nuts and bolts of like just the basics, the fundamentals. But yeah, there's a lot more too. I think they're two reasonable examples though of how we'd change things if we had our time again.
We really hope that there's going to be a write up. Like, as I know you shared, like, oh, this is just a little bit of it, and it's also one of the things that we're asking from several of the other ecosystems. We know that, for example, Filecoin already shared theirs in terms of like what were some of the learnings. We'd love to see, or I don't know if other people, but I would definitely love to see it, as it's one of the things that now, as we keep iterating the product, the Easy Reader PGF product, and understanding, okay, how is it useful, what didn't work well. We've been doing several retrospective with others, so with those teams that we weren't working so close with, it's definitely valuable to understand as well, like, oh, we were all using the same tool, what were some of these frictions that they noticed as well.
For sure, yeah, we should definitely do that. I think with a few changes going on, we've probably gone a bit slower on that. But I know Themes was working on that, so I think we should get back together and make sure we share that out.
So we are almost towards the end of the episode. I always think that, with every ecosystem, it can be a series of episodes, right? Because there is so much that has went into, designing the whole round, and so many things, which are new. But, Ben, if I ask you, like, looking ahead, right, how do you see retroactive funding evolve in the public goods space, right? Like, any particular trends or maybe innovations that you are excited about or that you would like to see, maybe, right? So yeah, I would love to know more about that.
The part that I'm excited about is what gets people into the retroactive funding rounds. Yep. And what I mean by that is like there's sort of a pathway. Yep. And it's that pocket example of like, I've got an idea. I think it's going to create impact. Yeah. How do I drive that idea forward to a point where I can demonstrate the impact and then I can be rewarded by retro PGF programs. So I think it's probably just extending it out a little bit, maybe figuring out what the proactive funding aspect is and how we sort of balance those two. I think that's going to be like a really exciting one because, there's a big funnel of talent there, but it is still a barrier to expect people to go some distance into the future in hope because often they're just not sure themselves. Like it's really hard. What am I going to be doing in 3 months? I'm not sure. Yep. But if I can figure that out, then it's a lot easier for me to see that, hey, in 3 months that retroactive round is going to be there and things are going to work out sweet for me. So yeah, I think that's what I'm probably most interested in. And then I think the other one is just these mechanisms around how the decisions are made. It feels to me like there's a world of experimentation that can sort of go on in that space and perhaps make decisions. Perhaps we have some points or mechanisms that can tell us more of that sort of stuff. But I'm just excited to see all of it, to be honest. I think this is something, like I said, that is a huge innovation for the space. It I think will be around as long as crypto is around, retroactive funding. So there's going to be a lot of innovation, I'm sure.
Yes, and I think it's really exciting, as you've mentioned, to see. I think for quite some time in the Web3 space, it was like, okay, we've got proactive grants that might have different forms, either direct grants, either RFPs, and then we've got QF. and that's those are the two flavors in our ecosystem. And by bringing retroactive funding, I think we're not only opening the door to more of these loops of how retro interacts with proactive and how they can balance each other in terms of driving more of these incentives that we want to have more, like what kind of behaviors do we want to see more people exhibiting in the different ecosystems, but also opening the door to, if these two are already interacting with one another, which other mechanisms are out there that can also enhance this formula that we have. Like maybe the formula is not only two mechanisms, maybe the formula is better the more, either the more mechanisms we have, maybe having more actually reduces the complexity for decision making and allocating the capital to the different contributors. So I think I completely agree with you, and I'm also really excited to see how this mechanism continues to evolve, and then also how this seeing participants in, like, seeing ecosystem participants such as Pocket, such as Optimism, Salo, trying out and testing new mechanisms, how does that encourage others to test even more, or just go out there and get more creative and using some of the mechanisms that people have put out there and include them into their grant options?
Yeah, I think that's the beauty of the space. It just makes me so excited. Like, it's a wild west, and you just go all in, and there are so many different decision points, so many points where if there was a mechanism or a tool that can help make people's lives easy, it would be great, and it can just probably help us achieve our objectives faster, right? So I'm really excited to see, what next. And it perfectly aligns with, Gitcoin's mission as well, which is now we're going multi-mechanism world, where we want to identify the areas, the different decision points where we need a mechanism, or which can be coupled with existing mechanism, right? Because one mechanism is not perfect, right? So it's a, like I said, it's a wild west, and I'm so excited that we are all in this journey together. And Ben, thank you so much for joining us today. And yeah, really looking forward to continuing these discussions with you, and probably figure out ways to make things happen together.
Awesome. Yeah. Really enjoyed catching up. Always excited to talk about this sort of stuff. Yeah, and great to see you both again. So yeah, thanks for having me.
Yeah, no, thanks a lot for sharing with us. I think really kudos, and would love to encourage more of the of the teams running their own retro rounds and their different grant programs to share what are the learnings that have come out for their programs, so that we can all continue to improve how we are conducting capital allocation in the Web3 space. We don't need to all make the same mistakes over and over again. We can all benefit from what others have failed in, so that we are collectively improving how we're allocating funding. So thanks a lot, Ben, for sharing your learnings with us.
100%.
Thank you.
Thanks, guys.
So we just heard from Ben, who led the retro round with Pocket. Pocket round has been quite interesting because of the different things they experimented with, right? So two things, that I found really interesting, and I am also excited about, is that the badge holder selection process, and the whole process that the rubric that badge holders used, right? I think the fact that Pocket had other folks outside of their ecosystem as well as badge holders, without really getting into the expertise, rather enabling them to have context and support the projects, was quite interesting. So, like I also mentioned, for disclosure, I and Lau Namu were badge holders in the Pocket round, and we can attest that the rubric was great, and the whole process was really helpful and gave us a lot of context. And I'm also excited about how every ecosystem is seeing, this common knowledge, the learnings as a public good, and really looking forward to see how we can actually bring these learnings together, which we talked about, right? I know, Lau, you have more thoughts on it. Would love to know what is that you liked and most excited about, from Pocket's round.
There were two things that I really enjoyed hearing more from Ben. The first one was I was already aware that there were some retroactive funding happening in the Pocket ecosystem, but learning about how this tool actually enabled them to generate a better grantee experience was super interesting. I think it's a big space for improvement that most grant programs have, the relationship that they have with their grantees. So seeing how they thought of this, leverage this platform to improve that, and see how this is going to affect the ecosystem overall is really fascinating. The second one is I'm on a mission to have more people share what didn't go well in the rounds. So hearing from Ben as well what he would be doing differently in an upcoming round and what were some of his learnings is really interesting. I think other ecosystems that are running rounds or tiptoeing their feet and seeing would this be something that we could do in my ecosystem can a lot of valuable insights from what Ben shared with us today.
Great. Please leave any feedback that you may have and tell us about, how what you think about the episode and what would you like to see more of. You can reach out to us on Twitter and, wait for the next episode.